Hi, welcome back to my garden. This is now the third time I've tried making this video. The first time I didn't fluff my lines. I didn't have any lines. I sort of stumbled my way through trying to feel out the idea that I'd like to share with you today, and not very successfully. The second time I began by explaining that, and I'm now explaining the explanation. And that was derailed by, for those who are regular viewers, the extraordinary number of ants that can appear at the drop of a hat in my garden, seemingly from nowhere. They're not from nowhere, they're from the vegetation and massive ant nests that sort of crisscross underground. At any rate, let's give it a try. Let's see if we can make this time work. Now, I also began my first attempt at this video explaining sharing the feeling of, I'd almost call it a feeling bordering on frustration of my seemingly endless disruptions to whether it's my daily, weekly, monthly life schedules and plans. But if truth be told, life is going very well. Good stuff continues to happen. I have nothing to complain about. And does one need a tight and very productive schedule? Maybe, maybe not. My work has suffered, but I do feel that my sculpture continues to progress and things are moving in an interesting direction. But perhaps it's time to knuckle down again. And hopefully it won't take a global pandemic to really pin me down. But there we are. One of the other disruptions, was a hernia operation, and I've spoken about that before. And post the hernia operation, I started a bit of a reading habit, and I did a few reviews. And the latest book I finished, I really thought was worth talking about. It's The Inner Game of Tennis. Now, it goes without saying that I didn't do any serious preparation or research for this video, and quite simply forgot to refresh my memory as to the author, the name of the author. Timothy Gallwey. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I think it is. The title is definitely The Inner Game of Tennis, and there are all sorts of inner games out there, golf and other things. And this book, like its namesakes, takes a sort of Zen-like approach to sports psychology. And that's not surprising for me, because I think lots of different philosophies at their root have a core of mindfulness, and that seemed to be a very important element in this book. He talks a lot about self one and self two, and it's all about letting your sort of rational mind get out the way and let your sort of intuitive self just do what it can do. Very interesting. One of the important talking points or ideas that he explores at different points in the book, and it's structured in an interesting way. It seems to be lots of small chapters. I have found an ebook version of it. And I confess maybe I don't have the right e-reader, but it's all a bit jumbled up. Perhaps it's pirated. I think it is. I apologize. But I was keen to read the book. So, confession over. But it's a book with lots of small chapters, more than 100. And the chapters are a page or so. So, are they really chapters? I don't know. Whatever you call them. And he introduces ideas and then moves on to other ideas and then comes back to previous ones. And slowly he fleshes out an idea. And one of the ideas is a sort of examination of an argument that has become increasingly divisive out there in educational circles. And when I say educational, very definitely a sort of school perspective, and that is being competitive versus just simply the joy of taking part. And different people take very different views of this. There are those who argue that the sort of social Darwinists out there, that life is a struggle, dog eat dog, and we need to learn to be competitive. It's natural. And there are people who question that. Certainly I would question the core sort of social Darwinist principles, that somehow this is genetically programmed, evolutionary. We've discussed that on this channel. The truth is, if we look back at primitive societies, they seem to have flourished very much because they're extraordinarily cooperative, not competitive. So there's that argument going on, but Galway, and I'll take the plunge and suggest that is his name, and I apologise to him if it isn't, argues that both these viewpoints sort of miss the point. And in a way, in many cases, obviously the viewpoints could be very nuanced, and he's looking at them in their most reductive form. So, on the one side of the net, of this argument, there are people who want to be sort of successful, victorious, defeat their opponent. And on the other side, there are people who find that to be somewhat unpleasant and counterproductive in the long run from a social perspective. And he takes the viewpoint that they are both simply different versions of the same game, propping up your ego or avoiding damage to a fragile ego. And I'm going to, this is a bit of a spoiler if you read the book, although I would recommend reading the book. I really would recommend reading the book. And probably I've got it all completely wrong. And if you watch this video, read the book, and then watch the video again, you'll say, what on earth was he all on about? And if so, message me, and it'll be an interesting conversation. But Galway seems to argue that we shouldn't be avoiding this competitiveness, because in the end, this competitiveness sort of moves us on to another level. We need it. It's the challenge in the sort of flow diagram. Again, something that I've spoken about at some length in many videos on this channel. We need to have a challenge to push ourselves towards growth. So from that point of view, that challenge is vital. And sort of arguing that it's just about the joy of playing is just a different sort of game. And it's a different way of fluffing up your ego. And you fall into different traps. Being competitive and then feeling that wins somehow make you superior and defeats are deeply painful. Now, that's just the other side of that kind of argument. And again, it is just driven by insecurity, fragility of your ego. You need the challenge, you need to push yourself to some sort of limit simply in order to grow, and growth is good. Actually, that brought me up onto sort of I finished the book a day or two ago, and then my YouTube feed, perhaps it was a newsletter. No, it was a newsletter, and then I researched it on YouTube. It threw up a bizarre thing that I never heard of before. Again, I think I've got the name right, but it could be wrong. Misogi challenges. And this is an interesting variation on something that originated with monks in centuries ago in Japan, where they would undertake some sort of incredibly arduous physical task and then purify themselves in a waterfall or something like that. And it's found traction in the Western world and perhaps initially in America, where people who have sort of come across this idea, become students of this idea, argue that we all need to adopt some sort of misogi, whatever, challenge once a year. It has a few rules. It doesn't have to be physical, but the videos that I saw the challenges were physical, but they mentioned that wasn't necessarily the case. One of these challenges could be running an ultra marathon if you're a distance runner, or cycling across your country. But it could be writing a book, something you've always dreamed of doing and never done. Yes, that's a familiar story. There seemed to be two rules that the one presenter of these challenges emphasized. That it had to be something where there was at least a sort of even chance of failure. It needed to be at your very limit. And ideally, it should be something where failure didn't necessarily imply death. Death wasn't a good thing. Perhaps they were saying this just for legal reasons. If someone adopted the challenge, met an untimely end, and then all hell might break loose. But it seems to me, as much as this is a sort of, the way it was presented was in a context that one was being extremely competitive. But the challenge was overcoming something within you, and the purpose of it was finding out who you really were. And how can you find that out unless you go towards your very limits? And that's what Galway's talking about in the inner game of tennis. That we're finding out who we are, and we need challenges to do that. To find out the tennis player that we really are, we need to push ourselves to a break point. Pardon the pun. And I'm thinking about that. it's another of these false arguments. We sort of circle back. Whether one should push oneself to the limit or not. Where the comfort zone fits in with all of that. These are difficult questions, but in the end, there is I think there's a middle road that we can all find, a middle path that is a good one. So there we are. What will my challenge be? The inner game of all the things that I'm doing. What does that entail? A lot to ponder. Otherwise, I trust your lives are, whether following a well-trodden path or not, I trust it's filled with joy. Life is treating you well. And until next week, from a sunny Brazil.